afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to have you here, not just at Accelerate, but also to be a part of this afternoon's discussion, which I think is going to be very interesting and robust. And so again, welcome. I want to bring to the stage the quite illustrious panel that we'll have with us for the afternoon to spend some time on this important topic. So join me in welcoming Christy Kirby, Director of Endpoint Solutions at Tech Data, Tom Blankenhorn, Senior Director of Channel Sales with Microsoft, Marche Mansfield, Vice President and Chief Customer Officer for North America. We're here with Lenovo. Greg Ernst, Vice President, Sales and Marketing Group, General Manager, USL Zentel, and Lily Zhang, Consultant and author, Gender Ambiguity in the Workplace. So again, a great group, and we're going to have a great discussion. I will say at the outset, one of the things that's a particularly important issue for me, as you all know, this topic of diversity and inclusion is significant for the tech industry. Certainly has been for the last several years, maybe, more so the last few months in particular. But I want to make sure that we make one commitment in this discussion. I also often describe it as getting past the talking points and the marketing and have a really authentic discussion about what is a very significant challenge for our industry. And I think something that we're all both individually and as our organizations represent committed to. And so I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball to the panel when we start off and ask everyone to share very briefly why we're here, right? From your perspective personally or from your company, why you think this matters. Because I do think one of the foundational questions, again, to avoid this being a marketing session or a session where we're just delivering talking points, that we spend a little bit of time grounding ourselves in the very beginning about why this matters. And I think that might be a great way to kick off the discussions as we get into the technology issues and industry issues a little more personally. So again, with that curveball, I'm going to start with Lily and perhaps work this way to give everyone a little more time. So in your mind, why are we even doing this in terms of spending this time? Why does it matter?
I would say I'm here today because we're stuck. Like, I honestly think that in the field, we are stuck with regards to D&I. So many more of us today are able to articulate the what, right? What D&I is, what it is that we care about, but very few of us are able to know the how. How is it that we create inclusive teams? How is it that we capitalize on the power of diversity? How is it that we create these organizations that can make everyone feel and participate as their authentic selves, right? I think that is one of the largest problems facing the field, and it's a problem that I don't think anyone knows the answer to yet. It's what I've made my career around, and that's why I'm here.
Great, thanks for that.
Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. Just building off Lily's comment, to me, the first step on the how is building cultures of trust. And I've definitely seen that in my staff and my organization, where as we've learned and talked about being inclusive, the trust element is really important so that when people demonstrate, I would say, kind of micro behaviors that are unproductive or counterproductive, if there's trust amongst the team, you actually call each other out on it and do it in a non-threatening way, but then learn from it as well. And so it's a big reason why I enjoy coming to these panels, whether I'm sitting up here or on stage, is just learning through other people's journey. But to me, a big part of it is trust, and I love the leadership team at Lenovo. I feel like we have good trust, and I feel, Marche, if we were in a meeting together and I did something that hopefully you'd trust enough to say, hey, you know what, Greg, that made me feel uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. For me, Tarad, it's if I look at on a macro level what's going on in the world today, and sometimes for me personally, it can be quite overwhelming of how do I, living in Raleigh, North Carolina, actually affect change that can go out much bigger than who I am as an individual. And it's really important to me to build diverse teams, to make a huge impact within Lenovo, and as Greg does with Intel and Tom, Microsoft, et cetera, that just will permeate out in my hope, to the rest of the world, and everyone, will start trying to see the value. I know we're going to talk a little bit more from a product perspective of why it's a good thing, but to me, looking at, as Lily said, something that's quite overwhelming and we're not there yet, I think it's really important to talk about it, so that's why I do these things.
Yeah, that's great.
So I think the timing is perfect. Look what brought us here: transform and accelerate. If we're going to transform our organizations, we're going to accelerate growth, and we've got to look like our customer base. And when we do that, I think it's going to open our eyes to see opportunities and how to overcome certain challenges.
So I'll probably make it a little bit more personal. So I'm a mom of 2 kids. So I have a 7-year-old daughter and I have a 3-year-old son. And so my vision would be that they live in a world where everybody's just accepted. And so I believe panels like this and forums like this, and I appreciate Lenovo for hosting this, pave the way for that to happen for not just my children, but for all the generations to come.
Great. All right. All right, that's super. So I think that was very successful. Again, way to ground the discussion, to set a very authentic base before we get into some of the technology things. So back to that, at the product level, again, if we all take a step back and think about all the things that are happening in the world, and even things that we talked about yesterday with Transform, from our CIO to the DCG team to the PC business, there's some unbelievable innovations that are taking place. AI, 5G, big data, the analytics that powers that all. And I think if you think about it, on one hand, it's unbelievably fascinating. Our devices, if you think about it, they talk to us today, they listen to us, we talk to them. In terms of facial recognition, they analyze the way we think, the way we feel. They are doing so much more that requires both nuance and intelligence. And in some ways, that perhaps is a great way to begin this discussion around the power of technology, and also the opportunity when we think about how technology has got to be responsive, but how we also have to be thoughtful about ensuring that diversity and inclusion is integrated into our product design, development, and innovation. And so I think that'd be an interesting question to take this a little more closer to home for all of us in relation to where we live day in, day out on the product side of things, to think about how do you do that? How do you integrate innovation and diversity and inclusion into one in a way that manifests itself into its products? And so I know, to kick this off, Microsoft had a great Super Bowl experience earlier this year where I think we all saw a lot of the innovation coming out of that. So it might be a great place to start in terms of talking about how Microsoft thinks about these things.
I think it's a perfect intro. Can we roll the clip, please?
All right, that was great.
I think if that video doesn't showcase the power of technology and its way to change people, then nothing does. And if that doesn't get your attention or whet your eye a little bit, you don't have a pulse. I know as a Microsoft associate, that makes me extremely proud. So thank you to Lenovo and to Intel for allowing us to show that. The road to develop the adaptive controller you just saw on the screen took a long time. It started with the Xbox 360 controller, where the designers were trying to design something that would work for everybody. But their definition of everybody was somebody that had 2 hands and 2 eyes, and they weren't thinking about the whole thing, and they got rave reviews. Then they moved into a design called a controller for elite gamers, where low latency, and they could program the device and make the controller work the way elite gamers wanted to. And then that bled into the next generation, which was called Copilot. And Copilot was really cool because as Microsoft kind of went on this journey where they were starting to open up their eyes and ears to what the community of gamers looked like, they realized that they were excluding those men and women and kids and veterans and folks with limited mobility from being able to play the game. So Copilot was designed to take 2 controllers and meld them into one gaming experience. So if Marche only had the capabilities of using her right hand, she could game with her right hand and I could game with my left, and it would bring one gamer. You go fight dragons or shoot a spaceship kind of thing. Cool story where these 2 brothers kind of bonded playing Grand Theft Auto, and one had muscular dystrophy and the other was able-bodied, and they were just able to play these games. So the adaptive controller came out of something called Hackathon, and that's a once-a-year effort where we bring engineers from across the business in, and they work on passion projects. These are off-the-books P&L things that they care about. And they partnered with this nonprofit that was trying to bring gaming to veterans and gaming to folks with limited mobility. And they had to overcome the challenge that the boxes that these folks would use were really expensive, and they were hard to deploy, and they were hard to find. So they built this, and you saw in the commercial, even down to the level of how it opens and comes out of the box, was meant to be inclusive and respecting those diversity challenges that folks with limited mobility have. So the the end of the state, I really like the way they phrased it up. When we all play, we all win, and that's a pretty cool way to show the power of technology. So thanks.
That's a great example. So Marche, maybe a natural jumping off point here in terms of, we just talked about integrating the diversity perspective from the challenges with the controller. But if you think about from a female executive's perspective, and I know you're involved in our customer product development side of things at Lenovo, so how do you think about that from where you sit in terms of your day-to-day role?
Sure. Well, there have been many times in my career where I have felt different as a female in a male-dominated industry. But there's one example I can give that I think really hit me in the face that we needed within Lenovo to look at things differently. We do customer advisory councils all over the world, and that's valuable feedback for us in the product development cycle. But this was about 4 years ago in the Bay Area, and we were sitting around the table showing all of our new technology, and I was in a room with about 25 other of my male colleagues from across the world. And they were talking about getting rid of a product because the feedback was really good, but it didn't really fit. And all the panels that they've talked to said, we don't need something this small. It's going bigger, lighter, bigger screen, et cetera. And I said, well, hang on a second. I said, I love it because it fits in my purse. And then I don't have to carry a laptop bag and my purse through the airport and, roll my suitcase. And oh, we never thought about that. And I said, well, yeah. I said, because you're looking at it from a very different lens than how I'm looking at it. And I will say, fast forward 4 years, the councils that we do, even within Lenovo, we have 55,000 employees across 60 countries who use our new technology, test it out to make sure that we're creating that unique customer experience for that unique customer, and all customers are different. So that's something that's really important to us.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, Lily, I think there's an interesting point Marche just made. So you just can't innovate with diversity in mind without diverse minds that are part of that process, right? And so talk to us a little bit about what you see from other brands that you're consulting or companies that you get exposure to from the West Coast perspective that perhaps are doing creative things to ensure they have diverse minds that are present, not just survey feedback, survey data, right, that's capturing perspectives.
So a lot of what I've seen are companies that rely on those sorts of aha moments that involve talking to people at the very last minute, often in the process, and someone like you speaking up and saying, hey, hold up, right? Your entire process has been wrong. And those are often held up as inspirational moments, but when I talk to leaders, people don't realize that putting your entire process on somebody accidentally stumbling into all of the ways in which your product is not inclusive is not actually a great strategy. It's not a very sustainable strategy. And so what I do when I talk with my clients is I find ways to put those diverse minds in the room in the first place, right? If we have more people of color, more women, more minorities in general working on these products from day one, you can avoid these sorts of costly mistakes, right? You can avoid these sorts of situations where months and months of work is derailed by one person saying, oh wait, women exist, right? That would never come up if there was a woman in the room. And so that really speaks to how important it is to put this diversity on your team, and not only put it on your team, but help the diverse hires feel included, right? If you hire women, if you hire minorities, and you don't create a culture of inclusion, they're not going to feel empowered to speak up and say, hey, I think you're doing it wrong. Hey, I think your process is a little flawed. Hey, you forgot about women, right? And so this is really what I think is the biggest reason for us to invest in diversity and inclusion, not just in talk, but also in the actions that we do in our workplace, in the resources that we allocate to D&I programs, in that sort of programming and support to not only bring on diversity, but to actually unlock the power of it so we don't have these mistakes.
Sure, okay. Okay, so that was fascinating. So the Xbox is a great example, I think, of integrating these diverse perspectives into product design and the way we think about innovation. And Marche, and we talked a little bit about customers and bringing that perspective in. But so the other area, the other side of this is the representative part of diversity, right? So we got to this a little bit with the comments that Lily just made about the fundamentals about the seats around the table and who's sitting in them. and how we get to representation around the actual numbers. And I know that Intel has been in the news for the last couple of months around some of their diversity progress around their annual report, I think it was, where I saw some phenomenal data. So Greg, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about kind of what you all reported out on and the Intel perspective on representative D&I and some things that we might be able to learn from that great work.
Sure. Thanks, Terod. Yeah, for us, Intel, we've got we're very fortunate. Our products, compute, is used by every person in the country, and most people in the world at this point. Whether it's the applications on our phone, like Google Maps or Facebook, Uber, all of that's powered by Intel data centers. And increasingly, as we're moving into the AI space, again, a lot of decisions are going to be based off the data that's ran and powered by Intel CPUs. So our previous CEO recognized this and really made a bold statement externally to be, frankly, a kick in the butt internally 4 years ago, which is to say, hey, we've got to make decisions, and we have inputs and insights, just like you were saying, Lily, at every point of the design phase, but also the way we go to market. We need equal representation across the room. We got, and that was kind of an aha moment to go external. And like I said, it was a rallying cry for all of us to really get comfortable of, okay, it's got to be a culture change, and this isn't just going to happen organically. Right. So we did set goals to meet diverse representation by 2020. As you mentioned, Terod, it's amazing what you can do when your CEO makes bold statements externally, but it transformed the culture internally, and we achieved the goals just a few months ago. So two full years in advance, and I see it daily across my teams now, of just the depth of the ideation is better. But Lily, as you were saying earlier, the next step for us is now ensuring that these teams are inclusive, ensuring that we're listening, and ensuring that that we recognize it's a start, but only a start. And we still, even at Intel, we still have a lot of work in front of us.
Sure. Well, the report is phenomenal. I know we use it a lot at Lenovo in terms of a benchmark, and so we appreciate all that goes into that. But one of the other points that you made, I do think, is also critical, which is this discussion around the pipeline, right? And so it's not just looking at how we do that today in terms of our organizations and hiring, but also looking at how we begin to build the pipeline before we're looking at adult populations that we're talking to about full-time employment. I know Christie Tech Data is doing some great things around STEM education and the pipeline to look at younger age groups and demographics that are ultimately going to be the feeders for what we're all trying to do in the next 3 to 5 to 10 years. And so tell us a little bit about what Tech Data is doing there. That's a great model for us.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. So it definitely, this conversation starts way before people enter the workforce. It starts from very, very early education, which is probably the most pivotal point in having this conversation. If you look at today, and it still happens everywhere, gender roles that we assign to little kids. I mean, little girls are still the ones playing with baby dolls, and they're still the ones that are teachers, and little boys are still the ones playing with Lego sets and erector sets. If you think about STEM, who is more likely to become an engineer in that scenario? It's always going to be the boy. So it starts with us to ensure early education is there, and that we're encouraging of gender roles that are inclusive of all people. If you look from a tech data perspective, D&I is a huge initiative of ours. Inclusion, not just diversity, but inclusion is actually one of our shared values, one of our 5 corporate shared values globally. And the reason for that is because we believe we have not just a responsibility as people, but we have a corporate responsibility to make sure that we're pushing that forward. We have all sorts of business resource groups. So we have one called Beacon, that's for African American employees. Fuerza, which is for our Latinx community. Actually, one of our board members is sitting in the audience, waving her hand at me right now. We have Spectrum, which is for our LGBTQ population, and et cetera. And then also Elevate, which I'm a part of, which is for our women's resource group. And so all of those business resource groups not only work to ensure that we're being inclusive of the folks at Tech Data, but also that we're going out and we're giving back to the community. And we do things through Elevate, like we work with the Girl Scouts and we provide guidance and counseling. We work with Big Brothers Big Sisters, with Boys and Girls Club. We actually adopt a local elementary school every year, and our interns that are getting ready to come in the summer are going to go and do coaching and counseling and all that for all the kids in elementary school. So it starts very, very young, and if we start young, we will feed the pipeline, which will eventually pay deposits to all of us in the workforce for years to come.
Yeah, that's great. So, one of the things I also think that you've made me think about was accountability, right? We agreed this is a topic that everyone talks about. Every organization, certainly every tech company is talking about this by and large today. Individually, I think we all agree it's a passion point. But if we think about our organizations and where accountability comes from, I know, for example, Satya has been very vocal and visible, as have many CEOs reflected here, but also outside of the tech industry. But who owns this? Where does it live in terms of meaningful progress and the accountability for ensuring it goes beyond being a nice corporate talking point or a nice marketing brochure or flyer or digital ad? Where do you see within your organization that accountability lives? If it's not one place, where should it? We talked a little about our ERGs already, so there could be many places, but I'm very curious as to understanding what may be the ideal way or how you all think that works best. Lily, why don't we start with you and then kind of work our way around?
Sure, put me on the spot. So the answer that I used to give was it lives with everyone, right? It is everyone's responsibility to create a diverse and inclusive workplace. And then I was realizing that a lot of companies agreed with that and they implemented it by actually making it accountable to no one and then doing nothing. Saying, oh, everyone actually just has to do their part and make sure you try your hardest and talk about it once in a while. And that actually wasn't creating change. So nowadays what I tell people is, yes, it is everyone's responsibility and everyone needs to know what their team and what their division has to do to play into their company's D&I strategy. And this is a very loaded statement because most companies don't actually have a D&I strategy beyond D&I is good, let's do more of that, which is not actually a functional strategy. And so what I do when I work with my clients is I have them actually establish, look, this is what our strategy is, maybe for this region, right? This is how we're going to do D&I, and this is how HR fits into this. This is how product fits into this. This is how sales fits into this. And so people within sales, within product, within HR, all know their part within this larger strategy. They can say, oh, it's our job to, for example, reach a diverse population and have everyone see themselves reflected in the product, or something like that. And so I think everyone needs to feel a sense of accountability, but not just accountability to D&I as a vague, fluffy, soft goal, but as D&I as a real physical, thing that is embedded within every division's actual lived experience of day-to-day work. I think that's what you need to actually create lasting change and also hold people accountable to their roles in that change.
Sure. So Christy, you mentioned ERGs, you mentioned your board. What's the Tech Data view of this accountability question?
We believe we're totally accountable as part of that. Like I mentioned, it's one of our corporate shared values. It's definitely something that we recognize. If you think about us, unlike everyone else on the panel, we don't manufacture product. Our entire fate is derivative of us providing great experiences. So great experiences only come from having a diverse workforce that can serve all customer bases around the world globally. If you look at, from a Tech Data perspective, we've invested a lot into D&I, not just into people are having the feel goods, but everybody who's a people leader has to go through D&I training. Everybody who's an individual contributor has to go through D&I awareness, and we invest a lot of time into that. It's been something that I've been there for a while, and I've seen a fundamental shift in it, and it's really, really nice to see, because I think our company is also recognizing people are not separate people inside the office and out of the office. And the more you, as a company, recognize and acknowledge people's differences and frankly include people for those differences and celebrate those differences, you're gonna get a workforce that's more productive, you're gonna get a workforce that's happier, you're gonna get more discretionary effort, you're gonna get more creativity, you're gonna get less turnover, ultimately, you're gonna get a better bottom line from that, for sure. There's a study actually that was published in Forbes recently, and it was done by the Boston Consulting Group. There's like 1,700 different companies, 8 countries, all sorts of industries, small, medium, large, across the spectrum. And the research is there. The bottom line improves 19% for companies if you embrace this and if you don't. And ultimately, if the bottom line is improving, that means companies have the opportunity to go and do more for the community, invest in more programs that are outreach to the community, and ultimately, it sounds kind of cheesy, but ultimately, the more you do for the community, the better off the world's gonna be as a result of that.
Right.
So hugely important.
Super. Greg, Tom, Marche, what about that question of accountability? Is there an ideal place, or is it the entire organization or CEO leadership? I mean, what's the perspective you all have?
I agree with Lily. It's just, it's every people manager. And Intel made that decision. We look at the numbers, the diverse numbers and mix per team. It's a big part now of the end of year reviews. I actually, last year, one of my strong sellers, leads a strong sales team, his team was behind the curve on diversity. So they were getting decent results, but the org health survey was low, their diversity numbers were low, and they actually got a poor review. And that person, it was shocking for him, but he was behind the rest of the company as far as building a diverse team, and the org health scores were showing it.
Right.
So we had to put the talk with the talk.
Right.
So. Message was received,
Yes,
though, right?
yes.
So.
And what would the consequence be of not hitting those diverse numbers?
I mean, for us right now, it's just a lower performance review.
Yeah.
It's not dismissal from the company, but it's the leadership piece for us, as well as the results, are now equally weighted.
Right.
And to me, if we don't have if the leader doesn't have a diverse organization, he's not doing a good job.
Yeah.
So I scored him very low there.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think having the KPI on the dashboard and being a part of that conversation, I think, is something we clearly see as a best practice, and so I applaud Intel for that. I think that from the perspective of companies' ultimate accountability, I know one of my former employers, for me as a people manager, the diversity stats were tied to the annual compensation cycle, right? And so there's nothing that forces focus, system focus, on these kinds of things, is when you realize at the end of the year, the number could be X or Y based on not just how my organization performed, but actually the entire organization. And so again, that accountability is a big thing. Anything else, Marche?
Sure, I'd love to chime in on this. As you know, Tride, we have a Chief Diversity Officer within Lenovo, Yolanda Conyers, and she's been tasked with that important role for quite a number of years now. And it came as a directive or a mission or a strategic goal from YY, from the tops down. But I absolutely agree with you, Lily. Yolanda puts a strategy or makes us as people managers aware of where we potentially have gaps. And then it's on us to be able to go and act on those gaps. Two of the programs specifically I'll mention, because we, as Tech Data does, we look at every different level within the organization, what our sampling sizes and the diversity on that particular group. But what we noticed in Lenovo is once you reach a band 10 level, which is the level before you become an executive, the diversity went off dramatically about 4 years ago. And so we created the first diverse council that we created to get band 10 women into executive promotions, was called the Women in Lenovo Development Program. Because once we all got together, it was 20 of us. I was in the first class. There was 20 of us from around the globe. And we faced somewhat different challenges than maybe some of our male colleagues or other colleagues. And to be able to have connection, to be able to have sponsorship as well from other people people within the organization, I believe we're up to right at 50 to 55% of that class are now executives within Lenovo. And what we learned from that, and we've done several iterations from that over the years, is we created a mosaic, which is for our African American community as well as our Latin community, to be able to get that community into executive levels too. So back to Lily's point, if you don't have a plan and you don't have a strategic, we need to go and do this, everyone is holding hands and agreeing that this is a great mission, but then you don't actually see the results. So we're trying to do that, and of course there's always more work to be done, but I feel like we have a very solid foundation for building that.
And to Marche's point, I think it has to be intentional and purposeful. At Microsoft, we actually have ingrained into our semi-annual people reviews, we call them connects, diversity and inclusion goals. You actually have to think when you sit down, and it's kind of good because you pause, and that's a good thing to do, and just take a breath. You have to think about the things you're doing to foster a diverse and inclusive environment. And that goes from the bottom level all the way up to the top level. You were kind enough to mention Satya. He's a humble guy, and I think he'd be the first person to say he's not the catalyst for D&I, but he's trying to pull that out of the DNA of the organization. So for us, it's very intentional, it's very purposeful, and it's part of how we do business. And it's really neat to see what Lenovo and Intel and Tech Data are doing as well. It says that we're in lockstep. So.
Right. I think one fascinating thing, and this again is the point I think Christy made in her last answer, around the concept of a business imperative, right? And the data that we all know that's quite clear around the benefit value of diverse teams and perspectives and creativity and productivity and all those things that are widely known, but it's still an unbelievably pernicious challenge, right? And this is not just tech, right? If you think about, every other day you could pick up the Wall Street Journal and see XYZ industry that is identifying this as one of their more significant pain points. It's fascinating for me to try and unpack what really is behind something that is so clearly identified and confirmed to drive business value, not just a nice to do, but that across industries we still grapple with meaningful progress in a way that our employee bases see progress, momentum. And again, less perhaps from the perspective of the companies we represent, but more from the perspective we all have as people who care about this issue. What's that about? And how should we think about, is it possible to address this problem? Or is it something that we just need to accept as an incremental fixed change that we're just gonna have to be happy with seeing small wins here and there without a significant benefit coming from the work we're doing? It was a very tough question, but again, any thoughts on what that might look like in terms of why is it still a problem for us, given all that we know and all that we see and all the data we have? And again, there are great examples of it working, but again, if you think at the macro level.
Well, it's been a problem for a
Yes.
long time
Yes.
in the U.S., centuries. So, but one thing that we're trying, and we're excited at Intel, and we didn't come up with this, actually, Cisco, I think I can say them, they came up, but really just activating a strong ally network and making it, raising the issue not just to the people managers, but every person in the organization. And so at Intel, we've launched now Ally Nation, and the concept behind that is to get males, white males, to really kind of take an active role of it's everyone needs to do it, and everyone needs to role model it kind of daily. And so we've launched the Ally Nation program. A big part of that's what I mentioned earlier, which is creating trust zones across the company, creating a common set of vocabulary. So when anyone witnesses a moment where someone's not being inclusive and an opinion or a perspective isn't really being listened to, where someone gets spoken over, creating that trust zone so that any employee doesn't have to be a manager, raise their hand and say, hey, you know what, I'd like to hear what her thought is. Let's let her keep going. And the person who's speaking it will notice, for sure. And more and more at Intel, we're trying that to make it everyone's responsibility, not just the managers, to really create that daily cultural change.
Sure.
But Gerard, we're not confused. Like you said, we're still early in the journey.
Sure.
And it's a big reason why I come to these events is to learn what other companies are doing to turn the corner, just
Yes.
like you said.
Yep.
And I'd like to build off that, Greg. One of the things that I faced when I was looking for candidates is the resumes I was looking at did not create a diverse slate. So, you know, I challenge my team to, before we even get to that point, what can we go and do? So we, especially on the sales side of my role, when we recruit inside sellers, we go to diverse colleges. We go to, there's one right in our backyard, a community college that we go and sponsor internships to bring all different, you know, nationalities, races, socioeconomic, et cetera, into the business and teach them. And so it's not going to happen overnight. Sure. But my hope is that by doing that and reaching out to different communities, different schools, then I'll say we probably historically have, that we will see the results. And I agree, I think, Christy, you said it, we have to start the process earlier.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on the business imperative for D&I, and I think what a lot of people in this conversation are missing is they talk about the what, sometimes they talk about the how, but we don't talk about the why, right? People don't ask, why is it that we want D&I in the first place? And if you look back at the history of why D&I initiatives started, it wasn't because someone sat down in a room and said, I want to make some more money. D&I does come from a history of social justice, and it's relevant because I would say in the US, around the world, you're seeing more and more issues of racism, of sexism, of classism crop up and become issues that people actually want to talk about, and issues that people want to see addressed. And so when people are making progress on D&I, it needs to be contextualized within actually asking these questions of how is our organization lessening the impact of racism, yes, right? That is the question at the core of so much work, not necessarily like, how can we make this product more inclusive? That's the what, that's the how, but the why needs to be there. The why needs to be, we're making this product more inclusive because we care about creating an equitable world for everyone, because the world right now is not equitable for everyone, and we are taking a stance on the side of justice and equity. And that's the one missing step that I don't see many of the clients that I work with take, and I get it. It's super, super scary. But without taking that step, that trust that we've been talking about is so hard to build, because consumers are waiting. They're waiting and waiting and waiting, and they're saying, we deal with racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, transphobia, colonialism, et cetera, every single day. What are you doing about it? And when the only thing that companies can say is, we designed you a doodad, right? That doesn't really get to folks, right? That doesn't really build that trust. So I think it's powerful for us to be talking about the how and the what, but without that why, we're going to continue seeing D&I stall out in the way that it's been stalled out for a couple of years. I recently came across this research that showed that discrimination against Black Americans hasn't changed reasonably between the 80s and 2015. It's 35 years, right? That's a problem. So I think, you know, this is the big question in the field, right? And it's a question that I don't think anyone's answered satisfactorily, but that's why we're here, right? We're here to fix it. We're here to do something about it. And we're here because, like, our, you know, y'all's companies care about making progress on that issue.
Yeah.
That's the business imperative, if you ask me.
Thanks for that, Lily. I think, again, another great grounding point in terms of the reason for the conversation. I know, Christy, you were going to suggest something before we started that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one good thing that we can all look forward to is, I think part of it, you know, you mentioned an earlier point, this has been going on for a long time, but I also would say we live in a world that is now more connected than ever before. I mean, we're from an, you know, early generation. We're not in millennial phase, we're in Gen Z. And these are kids that have had access to information and really born with access to information and born kind of with this connectivity around the world that none of us had when we were children. So I think that definitely helps pave the way and open the conversation, because you're seeing, especially younger kids, maybe some of the, you know, preconceived notions or some of that generational divide, it's just not there with them, because they're learning from places outside of just their traditional family unit or the town they were raised in or what circumstances they were born in. They're learning and being exposed to experiences of all kinds. So I think, yes, we definitely haven't made progress, and I think that's why we're all here. But I am optimistic about the fact that all of us as technology providers are paving the way for that conversation to happen in a much different way as we go forward.
Yes, yes, I agree. That's actually a great point. So one thing to do before we begin to wrap up the discussion, I know we were going to see if there were any burning questions from the audience, but I did want each panelist to think about if you had one takeaway that you wanted the audience to leave with from your perspective. It could be, company focused or broadly, this discussion. I think we've had a fairly grounded discussion, but again, if there were one thing you'd want people to leave from your perspective, taking out of this entire conversation, what would that look like? And then to supersede that, the one question I would raise is, a year from now, what's the conversation that we'll be having about, I think this last point Christy made, technology and all the innovations we talked about in the very beginning, again, what we've done for the last day or so here and what will happen over the next day or so, and the speed at which technology is changing, and the criticality of these issues that we're talking about, the inclusive nature of product design and innovation, and also how we ensure that representative numbers of people are able to help us as organizations, as companies, as a society to address some of these issues. But a year from now, are we having this same discussion, or are we all optimistic that we'll be in a better place? Maybe this is more of a yes or no, given, again, these are tough issues. But again, I think there are people like us all who are like-minded, who work for organizations that are like-minded, who are all in a positive way grappling with the same questions, but at the same time still very, very committed to doing what's right and pushing through that. And so is there a general optimism that we have as a group that this is going to be in a better place in a year and that we'll come back and talk about this next year in Vegas and have much more to show?
So maybe I'll start. I think one, we'll have a similar conversation, but hopefully with steps forward. I think it would be really interesting to see what the resellers in the audience are doing up on stage. Those are your peers as part of this ecosystem. I think there's a lot of peer-to-peer learning that we could get from each other, what's happening in small business, medium-sized businesses, hear what some of those best practices are. From a key learning perspective, I think it's two things. One, we have to recognize this is a journey. You talked about the decades of evolution of things that are happening. But at the same time, I think my biggest takeaway is that, the more that we look like our customer, the greater and wider the sight aperture will be to recognize both the challenges and the opportunities that we have to both solve for and then to exploit from an opportunity perspective. And that's what ultimately will help us accelerate, transform, and just do the things we want to do.
Right, that's great, Victor. The point you made about broadening the aperture, right? And the world is, I often remind my team, the world is still flat and becoming flatter. And the reality is, at the end of the day, fundamentally for us all, it boils down to an issue of wanting our products to be designed for the audience that we're trying to influence, right? Our customers look no longer like one monolithic group, and we need that perspective. And so I appreciate you mentioning the point about the aperture, and also understanding that we want to ensure that we're addressing a customer base that's increasingly different than it ever has been, and it's growing more so every day. And so back to the takeaways point. Maybe Christy will start this way since we've started at the other end most of this discussion.
Sure. I think a lot of what we're talking about starts at the top and is probably the stuff that, our CEOs and some of the more senior executives of our organizations have to think about every day. But I think for everybody in this audience, most of us are probably people leaders. Most of us are probably hiring folks and leading teams. And I think it's, number one, to take a very real, honest look at our own organizations and make sure that we are not only ensuring that we have diversity from a numbers perspective, but we're actually embracing the inclusion that comes with that. So I think that's one piece. Also, we all are probably hiring people. I think taking a really good look at job descriptions. I think, Marcia, you mentioned it when you guys are going out and recruiting, you're recruiting in different places. But I think, what I hear all the time is, oh, well, we're just not getting the right applicants. Well, if you take a look at the job descriptions are probably written in ways that exclude 90% of the applicants that you're looking for to begin with. So it's about taking a more active role in the recruiting process as a people leader, not relying on your HR department, not relying on your recruiters. And most people, they go with whatever the standard job description is that populates in the system and probably was written 15 years ago. Right. Yeah. That is not conducive for today's workforce and the way that we're transforming as an industry. So taking a look at that and really just making sure that all of us, and I will continue to say this because of my two little babies, but all of us are participating in any way we can in early education and making sure that we're educating kids.
Super, thanks for that. Marcia?
Great. Yes, unfortunately, I think we'll still be talking about this next year in Las Vegas, which is okay. I think we have to keep the conversation going and to keep progressing as we go over the years. But my one thing I would ask each of you in the audience, and bringing it back to where we kind of started on the macro issue that we're facing all over the globe, is when you leave here today, whether it's someone in your organization or whether you go home and talk to your children about what does an inclusive environment mean to you? You know, I think I've asked my kids that a couple times. I said, if someone is sitting at the cafeteria at the lunch table that may look like you or may not look like you, but if they're sitting by themselves, ask them to come join you. I think it's one of those things is just be kind, no matter what your background is, no matter what neighborhood you live in. And I would encourage each of us, because I agree, we have to hit it from multiple angles, and corporate America can't solve this. I think we have to hit it from a lot of different angles. And I think that for me, if I were sitting in your shoes, the one recommendation I would have is, you know, it's almost, I think I saw Bev in the audience, we did a women's leadership thing, and she talked about the butterfly effect, right? So if you touch, and that really hit home for me, Bev, and I've tried to live by that ever since you talked to our internal team about it, is just tell one person something that you learned today or something you would do different tomorrow. And then hopefully that progresses this issue faster.
That's great. Thanks for that.
Well, Marche, Tarad, this is first I heard we're going to Vegas, so that's where it is next year.
Congratulations.
Yeah, good. To me, it's unfortunately there will be a panel.
Sure.
On this topic. What I'm certain of, though, is there'll be new learnings from the panel, and there will certainly have been progress. I see genuine commitment across with Lenovo, with Microsoft, with Tech Data. Just everyone's leaning in, working through this. Lily, I think your challenge of don't just become a diverse company, but take advantage of your leadership voice in the industry and speak broader on the social injustice was thought-provoking, because you're right. Although we've at Intel, we've done a lot of things to make ourselves more inclusive in a more welcoming environment for people of all classes, all races. We probably could go one step further around the social injustice. So that was a big takeaway from me. And it will definitely work back with our executive staff on ideas. But thank you to everyone, and thank you to the panel as well.
Thank you. All right, Lily.
I think if there's one thing I could end with, a key takeaway for all of you in the audience would be all of you as individuals, there is something that each one of you can do better than all of us. I don't know what that thing is, but maybe you're the person that writes job descriptions. Maybe you're the person that's good friends with your manager. Maybe you're the person who's raising 2 kids who you really care about, right? But it's your job to find out your role, your position, your point of influence in your life that only you can do to make things better and to do it with excellence, right? It's your job to figure out what that is for you, because none of us can do that. And it's our job to figure out what we can do better than any of you and do that, right? I remember a story about a CEO that I talked to that joined his employees' protest in solidarity. And I was like, man, they're protesting you, right? Your job is not to be here marching. It's to make the change that everyone here is putting themselves on the line to ask you to make, right? That is the single biggest good you can do in this moment. And by doing that, you're doing your job, right? It feels good sometimes to participate within social justice, but it's important for all of us to contextualize who we are, what we do, what we care about, and do that thing that we do best, and to trust that all of us here have each other's back to do the rest.
Yes.
I think that's the biggest takeaway I can give.
All right, that's great. This felt cathartic, I think. This was, in some ways, I feel in a better place leaving than I did coming in. So why don't you join me in thanking our panelists for being a part of this discussion. It's a very authentic discussion that I think was phenomenal. And thank you all for being a part of this discussion as well. We hope you've enjoyed this time, that you enjoy the rest of your time here at Accelerate. And we'll look to see you again for a different nuance of this discussion in Vegas next year. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.